I don't need your permission, Valerie snapped, eyes blazing, hand frozen mid-hover over my keyboard. This whole bottleneck is getting rewritten. I should have stopped her right there, should have reminded her that even she, with her flashy MBA and boardroom swagger, didn't have the authority to override core compliance policy. But I didn't say a word. I just stood there, hands still, heartbeat steady, while she deleted an access control block I'd built 5 years ago to stop a known vendor leak. I'd written the policy. I'd coded the rule. I'd been in that office when the previous COO signed the sovereignty clause that made it untouchable. But she didn't care. Valerie Monroe didn't just want control, she wanted to be seen breaking it. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to subscribe and like the video. It helps more than you think, and it keeps these stories alive for the next listener. Seriously, 97% never subscribe, and we notice. Thanks for being the exception. That day should have been my sign. But like most compliance professionals, I'd trained myself to document instead of argue. So I watched, I logged, and I waited. Let me rewind. 6 years earlier, Alverson Global poached me from a defense analytics firm. I'd built intrusion response frameworks for contractors with names no one's supposed to say out loud. Quiet systems, silent rules. But what Alverson needed wasn't just someone who could lock things down. It was someone who understood what not to lock. Cross-border deals, GDPR entanglements, investor jurisdictions. It's not just about protecting data. It's about proving you did when a regulator comes knocking. So I built their compliance spine. Quietly. From the inside. I didn't need credit. I had reach. Every contract over $1 passed through my framework. Every due diligence scan, every risk flag, every exit clause. And at the core? Clause 77A, a failsafe requiring policy originator authentication, mine, on high-value external agreements. It was tucked in a footnote, buried under insurance language. Legal ratified it. Board approved it. No one ever read it again. Which suited me just fine. Until Valerie arrived. She came from the tech world. Startups, SaaS, scale-at-all-costs culture. The kind of executive who thought compliance meant annoying. Her first town hall? She used the word friction 9 times in one sentence. By the end of week 2, she'd already scheduled a process audit. By the end of month 1, she'd hired a third-party streamlining firm called NetrialX. Their idea of a security review? Asking ChatGPT what the policy should be. I wish I were kidding. I kept my head down, but I didn't stay quiet. I flagged changes, logged conflicts, issued internal guidance memos that no one read. She started excluding me from meetings, stopped replying to questions. Once I caught her smirking at an all-hands when someone asked who wrote our security policy. Some legacy system, she said, brushing it off. I was sitting in the 3rd row, didn't even blink. What Valerie didn't understand, what she never even checked, was that the very system she was gutting wasn't some passive PDF. It was active infrastructure. It lived. It enforced, and it tracked every unauthorized attempt to bypass core controls, including hers. So I waited, patiently, because I knew what she didn't. Clause 77A isn't optional. It isn't advisory. It's a tripwire. And the North River deal? That $3.9 billion acquisition that would make or break our next 2 fiscal years. It was sprinting toward that tripwire at full speed, and I was the only one holding the key. By the start of Q3, the scent of corporate perfume shifted. Fresh paint on the 11th floor, new banners in the hallway about modern efficiency, and a slick onboarding video featuring stock actors pretending to be thrilled by cloud migration. Valerie had begun her streamlining initiative. Her language was vague, but the results weren't. Full systems audit, termination of legacy frameworks, new vendor rollouts with firms we hadn't properly vetted. Suddenly, procedures I'd curated over years were under scrutiny by consultants half my age who thought compliance risk was a vibe, not a liability. NetrialX moved in like a swarm. Fresh out of their Series B funding and drunk on their own slide decks, they pitched next-gen security that boiled down to turning off anything that slowed down onboarding. I watched in slow horror as they replaced multi-tier access protocols with a single sign-on tied to an untested API. It's adaptive, one of their engineers boasted, waving away my questions about access anomaly detection. The AI learns who to trust. I asked what would happen when it trusted the wrong person. His response? We'll pivot. They called it modernization. I called it what it was, exposure. Internal policy reviews were crammed into 20-minute Zooms. Version control vanished. Access logs were rebuilt from scratch, except they didn't really rebuild them. Just dropped a cloud-based dashboard on top of incomplete data and called it real-time insight. Valerie stood in front of her team, arms crossed, and declared, "We're done with overkill. No more locking doors on empty rooms." Empty rooms. That's what she thought compliance was. I tried to escalate my concerns. Quietly, at first. Wrote memos, flagged red lines, pointed to actual contractual obligations, GDPR boundaries, CCPA echoes, interjurisdictional protocols. She skimmed the summary of one doc, tossed it on the table, and muttered, "It's all fluff." A week later, during a vendor call, she said it out loud. "You're not even needed for this." There was a silence on the line that lasted longer than the call itself. What she didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was that she was standing on a minefield, one I'd personally designed. And her consultants? They weren't even wearing boots. Clause 77A wasn't decorative. It wasn't something I slipped in as an ego trip. It was a legal backstop, a fail-safe. It stated, in dry, board-ratified language, that any external contractual agreement exceeding $1 billion in valuation required authentication by the originating policy architect, me. It didn't say may require, it said must. My digital signature wasn't just a formality. It was a cryptographic token embedded into the deal's secure ledger system. No token, no trigger, no trigger, no deal. And here's the part that still makes me smile. Valerie approved the North River deal budget escalation herself. She nudged it from $980 million to $1.02 billion to show commitment and momentum. That's what her email said. She had no idea she'd just activated my clause, so I stayed quiet. I documented the process degradation. I captured screen recordings of access loopholes introduced by NetRealX. I submitted my objections via proper channels, twice. Both were marked as resolved, no further action. I smiled, thanked the system for logging it, and kept a time-stamped copy. Because here's what Valerie Monroe never understood about people like me. We don't shout. We don't throw tantrums. We build things carefully, deliberately, and with just enough friction to protect people from their own arrogance. And if she wanted a world without friction, well, she was about to find out what it feels like when a billion-dollar deal slams into a wall made of one quiet signature, and it's missing. She didn't knock, just barged in like a windstorm made of spite and perfume. Valerie stood in my doorway, eyes wild, a red folder clutched so tightly in her hand I half expected it to tear in two. "Why are you blocking the policy refresh on NR7?" she hissed. I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting this. "Because NR7 exceeds the threshold," I said, voice even. "The contract value just crossed $1.02 billion. I need to validate, per 77A. She stepped closer, tossed the folder onto my desk, and jabbed a manicured finger at the top page. "This is obstruction," she snapped. "You're acting like a gatekeeper instead of a team player." That one made me laugh. Quietly. I looked up at her, met her eyes. "I'm following the framework you ignored." She didn't want an answer. She wanted a target. "You're suspended," she barked. "Effective immediately, pending investigation." And that was it. No HR rep, no paperwork, just a knee-jerk power play from someone who hadn't even read the clause she'd just tripped. She expected resistance, a plea, a storm of protest. But I didn't argue. I closed my laptop, slid it into my leather satchel, stood up, and buttoned my coat. She was still standing in the doorway, waiting for a fight. I gave her none. Just a nod. Calm, controlled. Then I walked past her. But I didn't turn toward the elevators or the parking garage. I turned toward the front lobby, because I knew who was waiting there. Martin Harlow, CFO of North River Capital, was standing beneath the massive hanging sculpture in the glass atrium, checking his phone. He looked up as I approached, smiling automatically, then noticed the bag over my shoulder, the look on my face. "Everything okay?" he asked. I adjusted my scarf. "There's been a development. Valerie just suspended me." His eyebrows shot up. "Wait, what? Why?" She didn't like that I blocked the final policy clearance on NR7, I said. But it's not personal. It's protocol. The deal crossed the 77A threshold. It requires my authentication. Martin's smile vanished. She suspended the policy originator, he said, as if confirming the words with himself. You're the POA for Alverson? Yes. And he didn't finish the sentence, just exhaled, jaw tight. We're scheduled to sign in 48 hours. I know. He paused, looked around the lobby like he was recalibrating time and gravity. Then his gaze landed back on me, steady. Walk with me, he said. We moved through the atrium toward the private conference suite North River had rented for Deal Week. His phone buzzed, probably legal. He ignored it. Valerie never mentioned 77A, he said. She told us everything was buttoned up. I'm sure she believed that, I said, but that clause is part of the compliance charter ratified 5 years ago. External contracts over $1 billion can't be validated without my signature. He stopped walking. You're telling me that if you don't sign, the contract is non-compliant, technically void, and definitely not insurable. He didn't say anything, just stared at the floor for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called someone on speaker. Alex, cancel the pre-signing prep. We need to talk to Alverson's leadership. Right now. I stayed quiet. That's the thing people like Valerie never learn. You can shout, you can posture, you can even suspend the person you think is slowing you down, but you can't erase a clause. And you can't sign a deal that doesn't exist without me. By the time we got to the elevator, Valerie's name was already being spoken in a very different tone, and all I'd done was walk out the front door. The room was too polished to hold tension, but it tried. Mahogany panels, recessed lighting, minimalist chrome fixtures that screamed prestige, all designed to make everyone feel like a deal couldn't not happen here. The North River team had taken over the entire East Wing for the week, and this was their war room. Final term sheets sat on the long conference table, printed and clipped. Investor decks were stacked at every seat. A bottle of Veuve stood chilling in a silver bucket in the corner, already sweating in anticipation. Martin gestured toward the seat at the far end of the table. We're here. Let's finish it. I didn't sit. He raised an eyebrow, already reaching for the contract. You ready to sign? I gave a small, quiet smile. I can't, I said. His hand froze. Excuse me? I took a slow breath. Valerie suspended me, effective immediately. I'm currently blocked from the system. His face didn't change at first. Then his jaw tightened. So, I said calmly, Clause 77A requires my digital authentication. No token, no deal. The compliance protocol won't release the validation packet without it. Silence. You're the POA signee? He asked, tone flatter now. I nodded. Policy Originator Authority, designated under the compliance charter, signed off by your legal counsel in the pre-deal review. Without my cryptographic timestamp, the agreement isn't just incomplete, it's out of compliance. He blinked. Once, then looked down at the term sheet as if seeing it for the first time. Valerie told us everything was cleared. She skipped the last gate, I said. Probably assumed it was ceremonial. He muttered something under his breath, short, clipped, not meant for anyone to hear. Then he turned toward his lead counsel, who was seated near the window, flipping through one of the red folders. Confirm that, he said sharply. The attorney opened a laptop and began typing. 2 others joined him. Within seconds, the North River room changed, buzzing energy gone. Celebration paused, the scent of power shifting. Martin turned back to me. How do we fix this? I need to be reinstated. With full clearance, you'll also need to log the delay with the SEC, since compliance clearance was cited in your public statement this week. He nodded slowly. We'll do both. I'll make the call. I tilted my head slightly. You may want to do it in person. He didn't ask why. He already knew. Valerie had just crossed a line that didn't get walked back. Her need to be decisive had detonated a clause she never bothered to understand. Clause 77A wasn't about power. It was about structure. And structure doesn't care how loud you are. Martin's face was unreadable as he crossed to the elevator and hit the call button. The mirrored doors opened and he stepped inside. No words, no preamble, just one sentence. We need to speak with her. Now. I stood there, quietly, not gloating, just present. letting the silence around me speak for what came next. The 11th floor conference room was packed, but no one sat. The air had shifted, no longer charged with anticipation, but choked with uncertainty. You could feel it in the way the junior attorneys clutched their phones, the way the risk officers exchanged low murmurs behind half-closed laptops. The closing ceremony that had been scheduled for 2 p.m. sharp was now officially marked delayed pending compliance verification. No one dared say it, but everyone knew the phrase was code for one thing. Someone had tripped over something they didn't understand, and now the deal was bleeding out, slow and public. Martin had returned with 2 of North River's senior legal partners and didn't even look in Valerie's direction. He headed straight to the glass wall, whispered something to his team, then leaned on the window frame like he was willing the skyline to calm him down. Valerie stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, trying to hold the room like she had an hour earlier. But that power had evaporated the moment she suspended the one person holding the final key. "Let's not overreact," she said, her voice tight with forced composure. "This is an internal personnel matter. It'll be resolved." Martin didn't move, but his attorney did. "This isn't internal anymore," said North River's lead counsel, a soft-spoken man with eyes like blades. "The missing POA timestamp means non-compliance with Section 3 of our merger safeguards. Without that clearance, our liability coverage doesn't apply. If we sign today and something goes wrong post-acquisition, your firm is exposed to full damages." He looked directly at the board chair, not Valerie. "In short, we would be signing a $3.9 billion agreement with no valid safety net. And that is unacceptable." A murmur rippled through the room. Alverson's legal team leaned forward, flipping through old versions of the compliance charter. One lawyer dropped his pen. Valerie's voice sharpened. "She was obstructing. I had grounds. She was undermining the deal." I stepped forward, not to argue, just to clarify. "I flagged procedural violations 3 times this quarter, all documented. The final hold wasn't obstruction. It was a required review, and I filed it before the suspension, under authority granted to the policy originator." She scoffed. "You filed it with yourself?" "No," I replied calmly. "I filed it through my new firm, Beacon Vantage Consulting. The policy framework, as you know, allows the POA to act independently if internal conditions compromise compliance. Clause 77A, subsection C." A pause. "And yes," I added, letting it land, "I notified the SEC per protocol. They were CC'd on the procedural hold." The room went still. That was the moment the board chair's posture changed, just slightly, enough to signal that Valerie was no longer the loudest voice in the room. From the corner, someone from Investor Relations whispered, "Did the press release go out yet?" A panicked shake of the head. "Hold it. Hold everything." Martin finally turned around. "I'll be in the hotel suite across the street," he said, voice low. "You have 48 hours to reinstate the POA and secure the timestamp. Otherwise, North River will suspend negotiations indefinitely." No one spoke. He walked out. Valerie stayed frozen at the head of the table, but her mouth was slightly open now, like she'd finally registered that this wasn't a debate. It was a detonation, one she'd triggered with her own impulsive hand. And I just stood still, letting the silence fold around me. You don't have to raise your voice when the clause already spoke for you. The emergency session was called at 7:12 a.m. on a Sunday. Not because the board was proactive, but because the North River delay had triggered a cascade none of them could ignore. 2 investor calls were already rescheduled. One international LP had quietly flagged compliance instability as a material risk. And someone, probably legal, finally unearthed the appendix where my name was still listed as the permanent policy originator across all strategic contracts exceeding $1 billion operational sovereignty clause, paragraph 4. Ratified 5 years ago, it had never been revoked. By 10:30, I was watching the live stream replay, no camera on my end, just audio and time-stamped slides. They opened with a grim tone. Valerie wasn't on the call, at least not publicly. Her absence was telling, but her fingerprints were everywhere. Redactions, overrides, revisions pushed live without proper countersignature. My memos, once dismissed as paranoid edge cases, were now being presented as legal sentinels. Each one tagged, time-stamped, and marked unaddressed. By noon, the audit summary was presented. Valerie's suspension order had violated not just HR process, but contractual structure. Specifically, Clause 77A's embedded autonomy clause, which clearly stated, the designated policy originator may not be suspended or removed from clearance authority without board-level review and vote, due to risk of non-compliance breach on all open high-value contracts. They hadn't voted. They hadn't even read it. They just assumed. A long silence followed slide 43. An internal org chart with my name still connected to 6 core frameworks and 3 active M&A pipelines. One board member, a woman I'd only spoken to twice, finally spoke up. How did we not know she was still the POA? The general counsel coughed awkwardly. It was technically visible, but no one questioned it because she didn't demand visibility. The framework worked, so no one thought to change it. In other words, I'd done my job too well. A few hours later, my phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but the voice was. Leonard Pierce, board strategy chair. Measured. Old school. Would you consider staying on? He asked, almost sheepishly. Not as staff, of course, but retained. As policy authority, under your consulting firm. It would resolve the clearance issue quietly, cleanly. I let the silence stretch just long enough to register the shift. I'd consider it, I said. Once you've reviewed Beacon Vantage's reinstatement proposal, it includes indemnity terms and an oversight carve-out for deal-level access, not just for North River, for all upcoming strategic contracts. Another pause. I could hear the flick of his pen over paper. We'll review it tonight. You'll want to, I said. Clause 77A isn't the only thing you've left untouched. He didn't argue, because Valerie had thrown a match into a vault and acted surprised when the floor cracked open. They thought removing me would eliminate the friction. Instead, it exposed the foundation. And now, to move forward, they had to ask for the one thing she refused to say: permission. The North River deal was finally signed on a Thursday. No champagne, no press op. Just a clean DocuSign interface and one blinking field marked Policy Originator Signature, Clause 77A. I clicked. The timestamp confirmed, the contract verified, and $3.9 billion moved quietly into motion. I signed it from my home office, the same desk where I built the original compliance framework 5.5 years earlier, back when Alverson was still pretending to care about infrastructure over image. Sunlight spilled over my keyboard. My cat was asleep on the windowsill. There was no applause, no witness, just a soft ping as the system accepted my credentials and sealed the deal. Valerie's name was nowhere to be found in the final documents. No COO designation, no signature block, no mention in the press release. She had resigned to pursue new ventures, according to the official internal memo. The kind of phrasing they use when someone gets quietly escorted out with a severance packet and a non-disparagement clause so airtight it might as well be vacuum sealed. Her office was cleared by facilities. Her nameplate was gone within a week. IT revoked her credentials the same afternoon the board approved my consulting retainer. Beacon Vantage Consulting, my firm, was retained on a multi-year contract. The line item in the vendor ledger was beautifully bland: strategic compliance assurance. But deeper in the addendum, buried in Schedule B, was the real statement of value. Clause 77A compliance retention fee, $4.1 million annually, indexed for deal velocity. They hadn't just asked me back. They bought the silence that came with never making that mistake again. The press, of course, had no idea what really happened. The official narrative was all polish and market optimism. Alverson secures landmark deal with North River, read one headline. Strategic growth ahead of schedule. No one wrote about the deal delay. No one questioned why the original signing date had been quietly erased from the timeline. But people in the room knew, and the moment that still lives rent-free in my memory. Martin Harlow, standing before the board on his final visit, portfolio tucked under one arm, speaking with the kind of restraint only people with real power ever bother to master. He looked at each of them, slowly, let the weight settle. Then he said evenly, "If you didn't have her, we'd have walked." He didn't wait for a reply, just turned and left. No one followed. The board didn't thank me publicly. No recognition ceremony, no headlines. But the new COO and interim from legal now had a quarterly calendar alert that pinged 1 week before any contract over $590 hit draft stage. Flag Clause 77A confirm policy authority availability. Every major contract now included a page labeled Policy Originator Routing. I wasn't listed as an employee, but I was the root. They'd erased Valerie from the building, but they couldn't erase the clause, and they wouldn't risk forgetting the one name they now knew had been holding the floor steady all along. They rebuilt the org chart without me, but around me. The new structure at Alverson was tidy, neutral, flattened. No more single-point executive power over compliance protocols. The board called it a distributed oversight framework, but at its core, it was a perimeter, drawn carefully around the mistake that had cost them 2 weeks, millions in delay fees, and a silent warning from one of the largest private equity firms in the country. No single COO could ever again alter Clause 77A without a full board vote. That clause now had its own lifecycle designation, its own audit protocol. It even got a new internal label, POA Core. I still wasn't listed in the company directory, but every 90 days a secure handshake packet pings my endpoint. It arrives under the Beacon Vantage routing protocol, encrypted, traceable, signed by 3 systems, legal, risk, and M&A ops. Inside is a cryptographic request for validation, my digital token confirming that yes, the transaction in question exceeds 1B, and yes, I authorize its clearance under board-sanctioned compliance. I haven't missed a ping. I don't need to. The handshake can only be completed with my key, stored offline, multi-authenticated, and wrapped in the same logic I wrote 6 years ago before anyone knew what it would come to mean. The new executives don't mention me. Not by name, not out loud. They talk in abstractions, legacy frameworks, external compliance checkpoint, strategic policy lock. But I see the revision logs. I see the token requests. I see the way they pause when a new deal crosses the threshold and someone inevitably asks, "Who clears this?" And someone else answers, "The system will route it." They mean me. They just don't say it. I don't blame them. That's how the best protections work. Unseen, constant, unimpressed by praise. Valerie's name was stripped from internal documentation 3 days after her resignation. No one refers to the North River delay directly anymore, but the reminder is built into every contract workflow, a digital scar. One junior associate once CC'd me by mistake on an internal planning doc. The subject line read, "Do we have the green light from the vault?" I never replied. Didn't need to. They don't see me anymore. But they see the clause. They touch it every day, every time they open a billion-dollar file and wait for that green check mark to flash. Quietly, securely, permanently. The system doesn't care about titles or intentions. It only cares about the handshake. And the only hand that can complete it is mine. Every year, right around the same minute Valerie had stormed into my office with that folder clenched like a sword, I get the ping. It's not dramatic. Just a quiet notification on a secure channel Beacon Vantage maintains for contract lifecycle confirmations. It lights up my screen with the same message every time. NR7 contract verification, confirmed. POA match, no input required, no button to press, the system already knows. My credential still sits in the core registry, buried inside the smart contract logic Alverson now uses as gospel. Every billion-dollar deal they draft passes through a compliance framework still fused to the policies I wrote when they thought I was just a quiet cog in the machine. I don't reply to the ping. Don't need to. My part was played long ago, but the check mark lands, the timestamp locks, and the system moves forward because the clause is alive and the signature behind it is still mine. They've built new systems on top, hired new advisors, added new roles with polished titles like Enterprise Governance Lead. But under every surface, the architecture still pings my presence like a sonar, not because they remember me, but because the system does. Valerie's name has been recycled through 3 different HR folders. No legacy file, no forward email. Her LinkedIn now lists a boutique consulting firm in Denver, but no one at Alverson mentions her unless they're whispering. The only lasting proof she ever touched the North River deal is the timestamp freeze when it stalled for 13 days, flagged under missing POA verification. That freeze still shows in the deal metadata if you know where to look. As for me, I've moved on. Beacon Vantage works with 5 firms now, sometimes more. I choose projects carefully, quietly. I stay off org charts. But high value deals have a rhythm, and I've come to recognize the ones built on structure versus the ones dressed up in hope. And Alverson? They've stopped pretending they invented the protocols. They just route around them, respectfully. The system doesn't post press releases, it doesn't speak my name on quarterly calls. But every contract they touch, every time they chase another billion, it sends that signal, blinking in the dark, saying, still valid, still authorized, still hers. And that's all I ever needed. Not a headline, just the shadow I left behind doing what it was designed to do. Keep the door locked until someone earned the key.